The Xolrith were a race once powerful and revered across the galaxy, their cities gleaming with advanced technology, their culture rich with history. But all that had changed. Centuries ago, they made a terrible mistake, one that shattered their standing in the galaxy. In their quest for knowledge, they had pushed the boundaries too far, unknowingly angering other powerful races. Now, they were alone, abandoned, forgotten. On a cold, desolate planet, Erissa stood at the edge of a crumbling city. The wind howled, kicking up dust and debris from the shattered streets. She gazed out at the horizon, where once thriving cities had stood. Now nothing but ruins remained. The once proud Xolrith had become a mere shadow of their former selves, their once great civilization reduced to a handful of survivors. Erissa was the leader of the Xolrith people, the last hope for her race. She had watched as her people slowly dwindled, their numbers falling with each passing year. The galaxy had turned its back on them, and no one seemed to care. It was as if the entire universe had decided that the Xolrith were no longer worthy of existence. They had been cast aside, left to fend for themselves in a hostile world. Erissa knew that the end was near. The planet they called home was dying. The once lush landscapes were now barren, the soil infertile, the water scarce. There was nothing left to sustain them. The storms that had once been rare were now a regular occurrence, tearing through their fragile shelters, destroying what little they had left. The Xolrith were running out of time. She had tried everything to get the attention of the galaxy, to plead for help. She had sent messages to every corner of space, but there was no response. It was as if her people no longer mattered. And so, Erissa had come to terms with the truth. Her race was doomed. But as she stood on that broken planet, looking out at the ruins of her people's legacy, something inside her refused to accept it. She wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. There had to be someone out there who would listen. There had to be someone who could help them. Erissa turned away from the horizon and made her way back to the survivors who had gathered in the makeshift camp. They were tired, hungry, and desperate, but they still clung to the hope that someone would come for them. Someone would care. But in her heart, Erissa knew the truth. The Xolrith had been abandoned, and the galaxy had moved on. They were forgotten. Just another casualty in the cold, indifferent universe. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a chance that the Xolrith might be saved. She didn't know how or who would come, but as the leader of her people, she couldn't stop trying. No matter how bleak things seemed, she would not let them perish without a fight. On the edge of the galaxy, far from the bustling centers of power, humanity had begun to carve out a place for itself in the stars. Captain Tarek stood on the deck of his ship, gazing out at the barren planet below. It wasn't much, just a small mining colony in a remote part of space, but it was home to his crew. The station was self-sufficient, built to extract valuable resources from the planet's surface. For Tarek, it was just another day in the life of a captain in the frontier of space. The colony wasn't much to look at. It was a collection of buildings and large mining rigs spread across a dusty, rocky landscape. There were no beautiful cityscapes or thriving metropolises like the ones humanity had left behind on Earth. But there was something about the stillness of the place that appealed to Tarek. It was quiet, simple, and free from the complexities of galactic politics. No one bothered them out here. They didn't have to worry about the struggles and conflicts that plagued the rest of the galaxy. Tarek had always been a man of action, a leader who believed in doing what was right, even when it wasn't the easiest path. He had earned the respect of his crew over the years, and they trusted him to guide them through the challenges they faced on the edge of space. But he wasn't just a leader. He was a man who saw potential in everything, even in places like this, where others might see only emptiness. The hum of the communication system broke Tarek's thoughts. A transmission had come through from a nearby relay station. It was an encrypted message, something that didn't happen often in this isolated part of the galaxy. He made his way to the communication room, curiosity gnawing at him. Captain, his communications officer, Lieutenant Dorian, said as he glanced up from his screen. "We've received a distress signal. It's coming from an old Solrith sector near their abandoned homeworld." Tarek's brow furrowed. The Solrith. He'd heard the name before. An alien race that had once been important in galactic affairs. Their reputation, however, had been tarnished by a long-forgotten mistake. The Solrith had been shunned by the galaxy, and it was said they had disappeared entirely. Most people assumed they were extinct. "This message," Dorian continued, "it's asking for help. They're in danger, Captain." Tarek leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What kind of danger?" "It's unclear. The message is fragmented, but it seems urgent." Tarek stood still for a moment, processing the information. The Solrith had been abandoned long ago, and no one in the galaxy had heard from them in years. It seemed impossible that they could still be out there. And yet, here was this message, sent from their forgotten homeworld. "This could be our chance," Tarek muttered to himself. His instincts told him this was important. He could ignore it and continue with their routine, but something felt different. The Solrith, if they were still alive, deserved more than to be left to fade into history. They needed help, and maybe, just maybe, humanity could offer it. Without hesitation, he made his decision. "Prepare the ship. We're going to investigate," he said, his voice firm. "Set a course for the Solrith homeworld." As the crew scrambled to prepare for the unexpected journey, Tarek's mind raced. What would they find? Were the Solrith truly still out there, or was this just some kind of false alarm? One thing was certain. Humanity had always prided itself on being willing to help those in need, and if there was even a chance to make a difference for the Solrith, Tarek was determined to take it. The galaxy may have turned its back on them, but humanity was different. They would not leave anyone behind. The ship raced through the dark expanse of space, its engines humming steadily as it made its way toward the forgotten homeworld of the Solrith. Captain Tarek stood at the helm, watching the stars streak by on the view screen. The distress signal had been weak, but it was enough to point them in the right direction. He knew it would take hours to reach the Solrith planet, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. What if the message was a trap? What if the Solrith were long gone? Yet there was something in the tone of the message that told him this was real. His crew was busy at their stations, preparing for whatever they might encounter. Lieutenant Dorian, the communications officer, was working furiously at his console, trying to decode any additional signals from the Solrith. So far, nothing. The message had been all they had to go on. "Captain," Dorian called, breaking the silence. "We're nearing the planet. There's no sign of life or activity in orbit, but the distress signal is definitely coming from the surface." Tarek nodded, his jaw tightening. "Keep monitoring the signal. I want to know the moment we get closer." The ship descended into the planet's atmosphere, the skies dark and stormy. The air was thick with clouds, and the ground below was barely visible through the mist. It was clear that the Solrith had not lived here for a long time. The planet was barren. Its once proud cities now nothing more than ruins scattered across the landscape. The ship touched down gently on the planet's surface, its landing gear sinking into the cracked earth. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the scent of decay and dust. Tarek turned to his crew, giving them a firm nod. "Stay alert. We don't know what we'll find down there." Arissa, the leader of the Solrith, had been waiting for them. She and her people were huddled together in a small encampment at the edge of a once great city, now nothing more than a series of dilapidated buildings. The Solrith looked fragile, their bodies thin and worn from years of hardship. Their once glistening skin now appeared dull, their eyes haunted by the weight of isolation. When Arissa saw the human ship land, her heart skipped a beat. She had almost lost hope. The galaxy had turned its back on her people, and now, here they were, facing the end of their existence. But the ship had arrived, and with it, a glimmer of hope. It was hard to believe that humans, who had never shown any interest in the Solrith, would be willing to help. Arissa stepped forward cautiously as Tarek emerged from the ship. He was taller than she expected, his human features rugged but not unkind. He looked at her with an intensity that suggested he understood the gravity of her situation. "You must be Erissa," Tarek said, his voice firm but not unkind. Erissa nodded, unsure of what to say. Her people had been abandoned by the galaxy, left to perish on this dying world. She had never expected anyone to come to their aid, least of all humans, but here they were, standing in front of her, ready to help. "We've come to help," Tarek said, breaking the silence. "We'll do whatever it takes to save your people." For a moment, Erissa could only stare at him, trying to process his words. Was it possible? Could they truly help them? The Xolrith had been alone for so long, forgotten by the galaxy. Yet here stood a human, offering them something they had not known in centuries: hope. Slowly, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for saving us." Tarek gave a slight smile, but his eyes were filled with determination. "We're not done yet, Erissa. There's still much to be done, but we'll get through this together." As the wind howled around them, the two leaders stood in silence, knowing that this was only the beginning of what would be a long and difficult journey. But for the first time in years, there was hope on the horizon. The winds howled around them, a bitter reminder of the planet's harsh and unforgiving environment. Erissa stood at the entrance of her makeshift shelter, staring at the humans who had arrived from the sky. They had landed, and for the first time in many years, there was hope. But hope came with fear. What if these humans were like the others, only there to use her people for their own gain? What if they left as soon as the job was done? Tarek could see the doubt in Erissa's eyes, the skepticism that seemed to hang around her like a cloud. He understood. Her people had been shunned for so long that trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. But he wasn't like the others. He wasn't like the galaxy that had forgotten them. He was here to help, no matter the cost. "We won't abandon you," Tarek said, his voice calm but resolute. He stepped forward, offering his hand. It was a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes to Erissa. She hesitated, studying his face. There was no hidden agenda there, no trickery. He was genuine. Slowly, Erissa reached out, her hand trembling as she took his. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice cracked under the weight of the years of isolation, of never having been shown kindness. It was hard to believe that someone would actually help her people, but here stood Tarek, offering them a lifeline. Tarek gave a small smile and nodded. "We'll start by getting your people to safety. Then we'll work on rebuilding." He looked back at his crew, who were busy unloading supplies from the ship. "We'll need your help. You know this planet better than we do. Where should we begin?" Erissa didn't hesitate. "Follow me," she said. She led Tarek and his crew through the crumbling streets of her people's last city. The buildings were old, their stone walls cracked and weathered by the relentless storms that had battered them for years. There was no sign of life in the streets, no children playing, no bustling markets. It was as if the city had been abandoned long before the Xolrith had arrived here. "This way," Erissa said, pointing toward a group of Xolrith gathered in a sheltered area. They looked up as she approached, their faces drawn and tired. It was clear that they hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. Their bodies were frail, their eyes hollow from the weight of constant fear. Tarek felt a pang of sadness. These people had once been a powerful force in the galaxy, but now they were just trying to survive, clinging to the remnants of a civilization that had been wiped out by the indifference of others. He turned to his crew. "Let's set up camp here," he ordered. "Start distributing food and water. We'll need to assess their condition and make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." As his crew got to work, Tarek stayed close to Erissa. "We'll get you through this," he said quietly. "Your people won't have to suffer any longer." Erissa looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief in her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in something, a future for her people, a future that wasn't filled with isolation and despair. "Thank you, Captain," she said, her voice steady now. "You've given us hope again." Tarek nodded. It's just the beginning. We'll do what we can to help you rebuild your civilization, but it's going to take time. The galaxy may have turned its back on you, but we won't. We'll stand by you. As night fell over the barren city, Tarek and Orissa stood together, watching the flickering lights of the campfires that dotted the landscape. There was still much work to be done, but for the first time in years, the Xolrith had hope. And with humanity's help, maybe, just maybe, they could begin again. The days following their arrival were filled with hard work and quiet determination. Tarek's crew worked tirelessly alongside the Xolrith, setting up temporary shelters, providing medical care, and distributing food. The humans were quick to offer whatever they could, but despite their best efforts, something felt off. There was a strange tension in the air. The Xolrith were grateful, but there was also an underlying mistrust that Tarek could feel with every glance they threw his way. Orissa noticed it too. Her people were not used to kindness. Not like this. The galaxy had taught them that help from others was always temporary, always with strings attached. They had been betrayed and abandoned so many times that even Tarek's sincerity couldn't easily erase the scars. One evening, as the camp settled into a quiet rhythm, Tarek found Orissa standing by the edge of the settlement, looking out at the barren landscape. The last rays of the sun bathed her in a soft, golden light, but her expression was somber. "Orissa," Tarek said, approaching her cautiously. "How are your people holding up?" Orissa turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "They are tired," she replied softly, "but they're surviving. For now." Tarek nodded, trying to understand. "We've got more food coming in, and the shelters are ready to be fortified. It'll take time, but we can rebuild." Orissa looked away, her gaze distant. "Time," she repeated. "Time is all we've ever had, but it has never been enough." Tarek could hear the pain in her voice. He wanted to offer her hope, to reassure her, but he knew that words weren't enough. She had lived through too much. The Xolrith had been abandoned by everyone, and their trust was not easily earned. As Tarek stood beside her, a group of Xolrith approached from the camp. Their faces were grim, and their leader, Raldric, stepped forward with a stiff expression. He was one of the older Xolrith, his body showing the wear of years spent fighting for survival. "Captain Tarek," Raldric said, his tone heavy with suspicion, "we appreciate your help, but you must understand that we are not here to be saved. We don't need your pity." Tarek raised an eyebrow, surprised by the bitterness in Raldric's voice. "I'm not here to offer pity," he replied firmly. "I'm here to help. Your people have been through enough." Raldric stepped closer, his eyes narrow with distrust. "You say you want to help, but what do you truly want in return? We have nothing left to give." Tarek held his ground. "We're not here to take anything from you. We're here because we believe every life is worth saving. Your people don't deserve to be forgotten." Orissa stepped in between them, sensing the growing tension. "Raldric, enough," she said sharply. "We've been through enough fighting. The humans are here to help. It's all we have left. If we don't take this chance, we may never get another." Raldric's eyes softened slightly as he looked at Orissa, but the wariness never left his face. "You've always been one for hope, Orissa, but how many times have we placed our trust in others, only to be abandoned again?" Orissa was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling in. She knew the truth of what he said all too well. The galaxy had offered nothing but betrayal. The Xolrith had been cast aside, and she feared that even this fragile alliance with the humans might be doomed to fail. But then she looked at Tarek. There was something in his eyes, something that told her he wasn't like the others. He didn't see the Xolrith as a broken people to be discarded. He saw them as equals, as worth saving. She turned back to Raldric, her voice firm. "We will take this chance, Raldric. We will trust them. The galaxy may have abandoned us, but humanity is different. They've given us hope, and that's more than we've had in a long time." Raldric didn't say anything for a long moment, and the silence between them was heavy. Finally, he gave a reluctant nod. I will follow your lead, Erissa. But know this, I will not trust them until I see their actions, not just their words. Tarek nodded in understanding. Fair enough. We'll prove ourselves through action, not promises. As the group dispersed, Tarek felt a pang of uncertainty. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. The Xolrith were not quick to trust, and even though they had taken the first step, there was still much to be done. But Tarek was determined to see this through, for Erissa's sake, for her people, and for the future of the Xolrith. This was their chance for redemption, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. The following days were filled with hard work. Captain Tarek and his crew moved swiftly, setting up new systems to help the Xolrith survive. They worked on building stronger shelters, clearing away debris, and even planting crops in small areas where the soil was still fertile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Each day, humanity's efforts seemed to offer more promise, though the Xolrith were still wary. The trust that had been broken over the centuries couldn't be rebuilt overnight. Tarek knew this. He could feel the resistance in the air, especially from the older Xolrith like Raldric, who remained convinced that any aid would come with a hidden price. But Tarek was determined. He had seen too many people turned away in the galaxy, too many lives left to wither in the shadows of indifference. This time, it would be different. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the ruined city, Tarek stood near the edge of the camp. He looked out at the wasteland, his mind racing. The Xolrith were stubborn, yes, but they weren't beyond saving. They just needed the right push, the right kind of help. Erissa approached, her steps soft but purposeful. She stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. The wind whipped around them, carrying with it the scent of dry earth. "You've been working nonstop," she said quietly. "The crew, they're exhausted. You should rest." Tarek shook his head. "We can't afford to rest. Your people need us. We need to make sure we're prepared for whatever's next. The storms won't stop." Erissa watched him closely, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and concern. "You're doing more than anyone could have asked, but I don't want to see you wear yourself out." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I can't stop, Erissa. If we give up now, everything will have been for nothing. I've seen too many people turn their backs when it gets hard. I'm not doing that to you." Erissa's voice softened. "You're more than just a captain. You're offering us something we haven't had in years. Hope." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I don't have all the answers, Erissa, but I know that if we don't act now, if we don't fight for your people, you might never get another chance, and neither will the rest of the galaxy." She looked down at the ground, clearly troubled. But what if this doesn't work? What if we're doomed to be alone forever? Tarek placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm and steady. "Then we will fight for your people, no matter the cost. I made a promise to you. I'm not breaking it." The quiet moment between them was broken by the sudden sound of a loud crash coming from the outskirts of the camp. Both Tarek and Erissa immediately turned toward the noise, alert. A group of Xolrith had been working on the defensive barriers, but something had gone wrong. Tarek's eyes narrowed as he saw the issue. A pile of rocks had shifted and collapsed, threatening to bury a few of the workers underneath. Without a word, Tarek sprinted toward the site, followed closely by his crew. Erissa, too, rushed to the scene, her expression one of concern, but also determination. "Get them out," Tarek shouted to his team. They worked quickly, digging through the rubble, their hands moving with urgency. It felt like an eternity before the first worker was freed, coughing from the dust. The rest were pulled out quickly, though shaken and injured. Tarek turned to Erissa, his face grim. "This is why we need to move faster. The storms are going to keep coming, and the longer we wait, the worse it will get." Erissa nodded, her expression hardening. "You're right, but you're not alone in this. We'll help you, Captain. This is our fight too." Tarek gave her a quick nod, but inside, he felt a surge of gratitude. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. The Xolrith were starting to believe, slowly, hesitantly, but they were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't entirely alone in the universe. That night, as the crew worked tirelessly to rebuild the defenses and care for the injured workers, Tarek found himself more certain than ever. Humanity had come to help, not for profit or fame, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The Xolrith didn't have to face the storm alone anymore, and neither did Tarek's crew. They were in this together now, and no matter how difficult the road ahead, they would see it through. Days turned into weeks, and the camp slowly began to take shape. Tarek's crew worked alongside the Xolrith, and with each passing day, their efforts started to show. The shelters grew sturdier, crops began to sprout in the newly prepared soil, and the storm that had plagued the planet for so long seemed to ease its fury, if only for a short time. Hope had begun to take root among the Xolrith, but there was still much to be done. Captain Tarek stood in the center of the camp, watching the work unfold. The wind had died down, and for the first time, the skies were clear. He could see the distant mountain peaks that loomed over the valley, a reminder of how much the Xolrith had lost, and how much they had yet to reclaim. They were rebuilding their world, piece by piece, but it wasn't just the land that needed mending. The people needed hope, and humanity had given that to them. Erissa approached, her footsteps light, as she came to stand beside Tarek. Her once tired face now held a flicker of determination. The long days of uncertainty had begun to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. "How are the people holding up?" Tarek asked, his voice steady, but with a touch of concern. Erissa looked out across the camp, where the Xolrith were working together to rebuild. "Better than before," she said softly. "There's still fear, of course. They don't fully trust you, not yet, but they see the effort, and they see the results. It's enough for now." Tarek nodded. "Trust takes time. We'll earn it, one step at a time." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the camp come to life around them. The Xolrith were hesitant, but they were learning to work alongside the humans. Tarek had made it clear from the start that they weren't just offering charity, they were offering partnership. It wasn't always easy, but it was the only way forward. As they spoke, a group of Xolrith workers approached, carrying supplies. Among them was Raldric, the elder who had been the most resistant to their help from the beginning. His face was hard, but there was a subtle shift in his expression as he passed by Tarek and Erissa. He nodded, just slightly, but it was enough. It was the first sign of respect from him, and it didn't go unnoticed. "That's progress," Tarek said quietly. "One step at a time." Erissa smiled, though it was small and uncertain. "You're right. Maybe we can do this." As the day went on, more progress was made. The humans and the Xolrith continued to work side by side, their hands moving in unison. There were still setbacks, small fights over how to do things, disagreements about what was needed most. But each day, the walls of distrust grew a little thinner. Later that evening, after the work had slowed, Tarek and Erissa sat together outside the camp, watching the stars twinkle above them. The cold night air felt different now, not so oppressive, as if the planet itself was taking a deep breath after so many years of suffering. "Do you think the galaxy will accept us again?" Erissa asked, her voice soft, but filled with a longing that Tarek couldn't ignore. Tarek took a deep breath, his eyes on the stars. "I can't speak for the galaxy. It's too big, too filled with politics and old grudges. But I do know this. You've shown me that there's more to this galaxy than just power and politics. There's kindness, too. And if humanity can stand with you now, then maybe there's hope for others to see that as well." Erissa turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "You really believe that?" Tarek met her gaze, his voice steady. "I have to. We're building something here, Erissa, not just for your people, but for the future of all of us." A quiet moment passed between them, the weight of the stars and the sky above hanging in the air. The work wasn't finished, and the future was still uncertain. But in that moment, something had shifted. The Xolrith had been abandoned by the galaxy, forgotten by everyone who had once called them allies. But now, thanks to humanity's resolve, they were no longer forgotten. For the first time in a long while, Erisa allowed herself to believe in something more. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new era for her people, a time when the Xolrith would no longer be shunned, a time when they would find their place among the stars once more. And with that thought, she smiled. News of humanity's aid to the Xolrith spread quickly throughout the galaxy. As the weeks passed, the rebuilding efforts on the Xolrith homeworld progressed steadily. The once barren land began to show signs of life again, thanks to the combined efforts of the humans and the Xolrith. Shelters were rebuilt, crops were growing, and there was a sense of unity that had not been felt by the Xolrith for generations. Yet, despite this progress, a storm was brewing, one that neither Tarek nor Erisa could avoid. The Galactic Council had taken notice. The same council that had turned its back on the Xolrith so many years ago, the same council that had abandoned them to die in isolation, was now aware of humanity's intervention. They would not let this go unnoticed. They called for a special session to discuss the implications of humanity's actions. Tarek stood with Erisa on the deck of the ship, staring out at the swirling clouds above them as they approached the station where the council would meet. It had been a long journey to get here, and he could feel the weight of what was to come. The council's judgment could either solidify their efforts or end everything they had worked for. Erisa stood beside him, her expression unreadable. The last few weeks had been a roller coaster of emotions for her. The Xolrith were starting to believe again, but she knew the galaxy's view of them hadn't changed. Many still saw them as a threat, as a race that had committed a great sin in the past. What would the council decide? Would they allow the Xolrith to return to galactic society, or would they condemn them once again? "We don't know what they'll decide," Tarek said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But whatever happens, we've done everything we can." Erisa nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "We've fought for so long to survive. I just don't know if the galaxy will ever accept us again." The ship docked at the council station, and the air was thick with tension as Tarek and Erisa made their way to the council chambers. As they entered the room, the representatives of the galaxy's major powers were already seated, their faces stern and serious. There were those who viewed humanity as a rising power, those who feared the influence of a new player in galactic politics, and those who were simply curious about the outcome. The council chamber fell silent as Tarek and Erisa took their seats. The head of the council, a tall alien with gray skin and sharp features, looked down at them. His voice echoed throughout the room. "Captain Tarek of the Human Federation, and Erisa, leader of the Xolrith," he began, his tone cold and formal. "We are gathered here today to discuss humanity's intervention in the Xolrith situation. Many in the galaxy have expressed concern about this. The Xolrith were abandoned for a reason, and now they are being given a second chance. But at what cost?" Tarek held his ground, meeting the council leader's gaze with unwavering confidence. "The Xolrith don't deserve to be left to die. No species should. We did what was right, not for gain, but because it was the only choice we could make. You may have abandoned them, but humanity will not. We will stand by them." There was a murmur among the council members, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging uneasy glances. The council leader raised a hand, silencing the room. "We are aware of your actions, Captain, and we acknowledge that humanity has acted in good faith, but this raises questions. Should the Xolrith be allowed back into galactic society? Can we trust them after what happened?" Erisa's voice was quiet but filled with strength. "We were punished for a mistake made long ago. We were abandoned, but we've changed. We've learned from our past. Humanity's intervention has given us a chance to rebuild, to prove that we can be trusted. We are not the same as we once were." The council was silent for a moment, each member considering her words. Finally, the council leader spoke again. The Xolrith will be allowed to reintegrate into the galaxy, he announced, his voice ringing out. But there will be strict conditions. They must prove their commitment to peace, to cooperation with the other races. If they fail to do so, there will be consequences. Erissa's breath caught in her throat. The galaxy had not fully accepted them, but it was a start. They had been given a chance, a small one, but a chance nonetheless. She glanced at Tarek, who was smiling faintly, his eyes filled with relief. "We will prove ourselves," she said quietly, almost to herself. "We will show them we can change." Tarek nodded. "Together, we will." This is only the beginning. The days following the Galactic Council's decision were filled with both hope and uncertainty. The Xolrith had been granted a chance, but the conditions were clear. They had to prove themselves to the galaxy. Many had doubts about the Xolrith's ability to change, to truly be accepted once more. Some were skeptical of humanity's involvement, questioning why humans had chosen to intervene in the first place. Tarek stood on the deck of the ship, looking out at the stars. The galaxy seemed so vast, so full of possibility and conflict. The Xolrith had a long road ahead of them, but for the first time in generations, they had a future. It was a fragile future, one built on trust that was still being earned. Erissa walked up beside him, her footsteps light on the metal floor. She had been working tirelessly with Tarek and his crew to ensure the Xolrith's reintegration into galactic society would go smoothly. The effort was slow, and some of the other races in the galaxy weren't as welcoming as they'd hoped. There was still fear, still doubt, but the Xolrith were determined to prove they had changed. Tarek turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "How's it going with the council representatives? Are they coming around?" Erissa shook her head, her gaze distant. "Some are, but many are still hesitant. There are whispers of distrust, especially from the more powerful factions. The Xolrith are still seen as a threat by many, no matter what we do. I can see it in their eyes, Tarek. We're not welcome yet." Tarek sighed, frustration creeping into his voice. "I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I didn't expect so much resistance. Humanity did the right thing. We showed them that helping isn't about power or gain. It's about doing what's right. But not everyone sees it that way." Erissa met his eyes, her expression firm. "It's not about them seeing it our way. It's about us standing our ground. If we don't, everything we've done so far will be meaningless. The Xolrith need to know they're not alone." Tarek smiled faintly. "You've got a point. If humanity stands by the Xolrith, then others will have to see that strength. It's just a matter of time before they realize that we're not backing down." But as they spoke, news arrived that tested their resolve. The most powerful race in the galaxy, the Zorath, had declared their opposition to the Xolrith's return. The Zorath were known for their dominance in the galaxy, and they had a history of conquering weaker races. They saw the Xolrith as a threat to their power, and they were not afraid to show their disapproval. The message from the Zorath came in the form of a direct communication to Tarek and Erissa. Their tone was clear and cold. "The Xolrith have no place in this galaxy," the Zorath leader stated. "You have made a grave mistake in aiding them. If you continue to protect them, there will be consequences." Tarek felt a knot form in his stomach. The Zorath were not known for idle threats. This was serious. Erissa looked at him, her face resolute. "They want to intimidate us. They think we'll back down." Tarek stood up straighter, his jaw tightening. "We won't back down. If humanity wants to be a force for good in this galaxy, we can't let fear dictate our actions. We made a promise to the Xolrith, and we'll keep that promise." The challenge was clear. The galaxy was watching, and the Zorath were ready to strike if they felt threatened. But Tarek and Erissa knew that this was the moment to stand firm. They had already done the impossible: rescue the Xolrith, bring them back from the brink of extinction. And now they had to do the impossible again: prove to the galaxy that the Xolrith deserved their place, not through fear, but through the strength of their actions. "We'll face this together," Tarek said, his voice steady. Humanity and the Xolrith, side by side. We won't let anyone tear us apart. Erissa nodded, a determined look on her face. Together. As the Xolrith's threat loomed, Tarek knew that this battle wasn't just about the Xolrith, it was about the future of the galaxy. It was about showing that compassion, strength, and unity were more powerful than fear. And with humanity, and the Xolrith standing strong, they would face whatever came next. Together, they were more than just survivors. They were a force to be reckoned with. The tension in the galaxy was palpable. The Xolrith had made their threat clear, and the rest of the galaxy watched with bated breath. Would humanity and the Xolrith stand firm, or would they fold under the pressure? Every day felt like a challenge, as the news from the council came in slowly. The Xolrith were not backing down, and neither were Tarek and Erissa. For the Xolrith, it had always been about survival. For years, they had been abandoned, forgotten by everyone they once knew. But now they were fighting for something more: acceptance, a place in the galaxy. And with humanity by their side, they had a chance. Tarek paced the command deck of the ship, his eyes scanning the galactic maps. The ship was ready, the crew prepared for whatever might come next. But it wasn't just military power that they needed now. It was unity, strength, and the courage to stand up for what was right. If they could show the galaxy that the Xolrith had changed, that they were more than their past mistakes, then maybe, just maybe, the galaxy would come to understand. Erissa entered the room, her expression calm but determined. She had spent the last few days meeting with the council representatives, speaking with the leaders of other races, trying to convince them that the Xolrith deserved a second chance. It was exhausting work, and the strain was beginning to show, but she wouldn't give up. "They're listening," Erissa said quietly, stepping closer to Tarek. "The council is divided, but there are those who are beginning to see the truth. The Xolrith may be powerful, but they're not invincible. We just need to hold our ground." Tarek nodded, his face serious. "We've come too far to turn back now. The Xolrith are trying to intimidate us, but they're forgetting one thing: humanity doesn't back down. And we're not in this alone. We're standing with you, Erissa, and with the Xolrith. Together, we're stronger than they think." The news that the Xolrith had earned a place in the galaxy was still uncertain, but the galaxy had not seen this kind of unity in a long time. The Xolrith's integration was still being debated, but humanity had made it clear that they would not let the Xolrith be pushed aside again. And Tarek knew that, even if the council didn't fully accept the Xolrith, humanity would continue to stand by them. As Tarek and Erissa looked out over the space outside the ship's windows, the future felt like an open door. They weren't sure where the path would lead, but they knew that this moment, this decision to stand together, had already changed everything. "We've started something, Erissa," Tarek said, his voice soft but filled with hope. "We've started a new era, and it doesn't matter what happens next. The Xolrith have found something they haven't had in a long time: hope. And that's something the galaxy can't take away." Erissa smiled, a small but genuine expression of gratitude. "We've both fought for this moment. It's not just the Xolrith's future we're fighting for. It's a future where no one is forgotten, where everyone has a chance." Tarek's eyes met hers, and for the first time in a long while, he felt certain about the future. The Xolrith weren't alone anymore. Humanity had reached out, and together, they had faced the impossible. Now they had a chance to build something new, a galaxy where compassion and strength went hand in hand, where hope could change the course of history. The stars outside shimmered brightly, as if in agreement. The galaxy was changing, slowly but surely. And no matter what obstacles lay ahead, humanity and the Xolrith were ready to face them, side by side. This was just the beginning.